Okay, let's unpack this. The Black Dahlia case. I mean, it's just one of those cases, isn't it? So infamous, unsolved. It's really haunted people for, well, decades.
It really has. And the crime scene, the image of it is just seared into public memory. It was uh, horrifically brutal and yet displayed.
Exactly. Which brings us to the focus of this deep dive. Because the killer was never caught, right? Anything we think we know about them, psychologically speaking, has to be inferred.
Purely inferred. We're building a potential profile based only on what was left behind. The sources we're using focus specifically on the condition of Elizabeth Short's body, the crime scene itself in that vacant lot, and importantly, those alleged communications sent later.
Right, so that's our mission here. Analyze that psychological signature, using only the inferences presented in these sources. What can these incredibly disturbing details tell us about the mind behind it all?
And it's so crucial to state up front, this is only about the interpretations within these sources. We're not solving the case. We're reverse engineering a possible psychological blueprint from the facts described in the material.
Okay, so diving right in. Based on the sources describing the crime scene and the state of the body, the first thing that just screams out is extreme sadism.
Oh, absolutely. The sources detail these extensive and horrific mutilations, some inflicted ante-mortem before death, and definitely others post-mortem after death.
This wasn't just about ending a life.
Not at all. The sources argue pretty strongly that this points to sadistic individual, someone who likely got intense psychological gratification and almost certainly sexual gratification from inflicting pain, terror, and just profound degradation.
The level of violence described just went so far beyond the act of killing itself.
Exactly. Things like the Glasgow smile, the
Yeah.
mouth cut ear to ear, and the complete bisection of the body. The sources interpret these as showing a deep-seated rage, a really powerful drive to dehumanize her, to violate her form completely.
And that's where the term lust murder comes up in some of the analyses within the sources.
Precisely. The argument is that the killing, the mutilation that followed, the absolute control over the body, these weren't afterthoughts. They were central to the killer's psychological arousal and fulfillment.
Okay, so extreme sadism is a core inference. But the sources also raise this really interesting debate. How organized was this person? Because there is evidence that points towards planning, right?
Yes, definitely. According to the analyses and the sources, the murder itself probably didn't happen in that lot. It likely happened somewhere else, a primary scene, and the body was moved.
Which takes planning.
It takes planning, execution, control, risk management even.
And what about the reports mentioned in the sources that the body was meticulously clean?
Well, that points towards a level of forensic awareness, doesn't it? An effort, conscious or not, to remove trace evidence. It suggests the killer understood, at least on some level, how police investigations work and tried to, well, hinder it.
The sources also mentioned the bisection itself, that maybe the way it was done hinted at control.
Yeah, there's some debate there. If it was performed with a certain perceived precision, some sources suggest that could indicate a methodical, controlled approach during that specific horrific act.
And then you have those alleged communications, sending her belongings, the taunting letters to the press and police.
Right. And it's a significant, if those are authentic, they paint a picture of someone quite calculated, cunning, someone who wanted to engage with the authorities, maybe manipulate the public narrative. It shows a desire for attention, for control over how the whole thing was perceived.
But you said this is debated within the sources. It's not clear-cut organization.
It really isn't. Because on the other hand, you have the sheer, almost unrestrained brutality of the mutilations. While the idea might have been planned, the act itself could suggest moments of chaotic, almost frenzied rage.
Ah, I see. So the sources grapple with that tension.
Exactly. How can someone be calculated enough to move and clean a body, yet seemingly so out of control in the violence they inflict on it? It's a paradox.
And the posing of the body, that's debated too. Ritualistic display or just
Right.
contempt.
That's another point of interpretation the sources discuss. Was it a highly symbolic, organized final statement? Or was it a more emotionally driven final act of just utter contempt and disposal? The evidence allows for different readings.
It really highlights the challenge of profiling from just the scene, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Okay, moving on. The sources also heavily infer significant anger and hatred, and specifically a potential misogynistic element.
Yes, the analyses often link this to where the mutilations were focused. The face so tied to identity and areas associated with femininity, like the breasts, the thighs. The sources suggest these specific targets often indicate a profound hatred towards women, or perhaps towards what women symbolize to the killer.
And it's important the sources stress that this doesn't automatically mean the killer knew Elizabeth Short personally, right?
Exactly. She
Yeah.
could have been a symbolic victim,
Yeah.
a target for this pre-existing rage that wasn't necessarily about her as an individual he knew well.
The way she was displayed, it feels almost impersonal in its extremity, which supports that idea. Like she was a stand-in.
That's certainly an interpretation the sources put forward, representing something else in the killer's mind.
Okay, let's talk about that specific point, the one that always comes up. Possible medical or surgical knowledge tied to the bisection.
Right, the hemicorporectomy.
Yeah.
The sources note that initially there was speculation. Did the way the body was bisected, maybe the apparent cleanness of it, suggest someone with surgical skill? Or maybe butchering or anatomical knowledge?
They even mention specific procedures as a comparison point.
Yes, the sources reference something called a Sunderland hemicorporectomy, but more as a way to describe the type of anatomical division, not necessarily implying that exact level of surgical skill was used. It's more about the location of the cut.
But there's a counter-argument presented in the sources too.
Oh, definitely. Other expert analyses argue that, while obviously horrific, performing that kind of bisection might not require professional training. It could plausibly be done with cruder tools, maybe a knife, a saw, even a cleaver combined with brute force and determination.
So the physical evidence of the cut itself isn't conclusive proof of skill level, according to the sources.
Exactly. There's disagreement on what it definitively tells us about the killer's background or profession.
Okay, let's loop back to those alleged communications, the letters and such. The sources seem to agree those point towards a certain personality type.
Yes, grandiose and attention-seeking. If those letters and mailed items did come from the killer, they really scream narcissism, don't they? Grandiosity,
Wanting to taunt the police.
taunt authorities, instill fear in the public, claim credit for the act, maybe sending belongings as these macabre trophies. It suggests someone who sees the whole thing as a kind of performance, a game they believe they're winning.
And that ties into the deliberate placement and posing of the body in that vacant lot.
Absolutely. It wasn't hidden. It was placed where it was guaranteed to be found, and in that very specific, almost theatrical pose. That wasn't about concealment. It was a display,
A gruesome piece of theater.
intended to shock, to ensure the killer's act had maximum public impact. The sources connect this directly to a desire for that horror to be known, to grab attention.
It's just chilling, that level of violence tied to a need for essentially recognition, which then connects to how they manage to just disappear
Yeah.
despite this massive manhunt.
It really does. The fact that this killer, after doing something so incredibly high profile and leaving such a scene, vanished so completely.
Yeah.
It suggests someone forensically aware, yes, but also someone capable of maintaining intense secrecy.
Someone who could blend back in.
Possibly. Someone potentially integrated into society, living a seemingly normal life without arousing suspicion, committing this unbelievably high-risk act, and then just fading back into anonymity. That's a strong inference from the sources based on the lack of capture.
So when you pull all these inferences together, the ones drawn from the sources, they start to form a kind of cohesive, if terrifying, psychological picture.
They really do. The traits inferred the extreme lack of empathy needed for that level of sadism, the potential manipulative cunning in the communications, maybe a superficial charm used to approach the victim, that core drive for sadistic gratification and absolute control.
It aligns with psychopathy.
The sources strongly suggest these are hallmarks pointing towards psychopathy, yes. That cluster of traits fits the profile inferred from the evidence described.
And the sources mention other potential motivators too, even if sexual sadism seems primary.
Right. They discuss power and control as fundamental drivers. I mean, this is the ultimate assertion of power over another person. They might mention revenge as a possibility, but quickly note there's zero concrete evidence the killer actually had a personal vendetta against Elizabeth Short specifically.
And thrill-seeking.
That's suggested too. The sheer audacity, the risk involved in doing something so public, so horrific, that itself could have been a major motivator for a certain personality type.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. The overall psychological profile, based only on these source inferences. What does it look like?
What emerges is this picture of a highly dangerous, profoundly sadistic individual, very likely a psychopath.
Organized enough, intelligent enough maybe to plan crucial parts, manage the body disposal, and then successfully evade detection completely.
That's the inference, yes. driven by these extreme violent sexual fantasies that seem intertwined with an overwhelming need for power and absolute control.
And the goal wasn't just murder, it was dehumanization.
Utterly. To transform her into a grotesque object, a trophy to be displayed for maximum shock value. And if those communications were real, it adds that layer of narcissism, the need to engage afterwards, to amplify the terror, to play this game with everyone. It's a truly chilling combination of inferred traits.
A horrifying psychological signature indeed.
It really is.
And the enduring mystery, which the sources keep coming back to, is just how someone who left such a vivid, such a horrifying psychological footprint could just vanish, seemingly never surface again in a way that led back to this crime.
It remains one of the most profoundly unsettling questions about the entire case.
So, wrapping this up, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over based only on the source material we've explored today. How does analyzing a killer's signature in this way, focusing not just on the fact of the killing, but on the extreme personal nature of the violence, the meticulous, shocking display, and that apparent desire to interact afterwards, how does that change the way you think about the relationship between committing such truly horrifying acts and the capacity for someone to perhaps exist undetected within everyday society?